What if the person you trusted with your heart wasn't who you thought they were? What if one seemingly ordinary moment, a simple goodbye, became the last? Tonight, we bring you the story of Lucy Carter and Daniel Ward, a story of love that took a turn no one could have imagined. In the quiet town of Norwich, Lucy and Daniel were the kind of couple everyone admired. Lucy, a young, ambitious professional with a bright future ahead. Daniel, a devoted partner whose world revolved around the woman he loved. Their life together seemed like a picture of happiness, until it wasn't. Behind the smiles and the shared moments was a hidden truth, a secret that would lead to a confrontation so intense, so life-changing, that it would shake an entire community to its core. Over the next hour, we'll uncover how love and trust turned into betrayal and tragedy, and how one moment of anger changed everything. Before we go any further into this shocking story, make sure you're subscribed to our channel so you don't miss out on the full details. Hit that subscribe button now, because the truth is always more chilling than you expect. Norwich, a peaceful town known for its charming streets, friendly neighbours, and a sense of security that its residents had come to take for granted. Violent crimes were rare here, the kind of news that usually happened somewhere else. But in the summer of 2024, this small town became the backdrop for a story that no one could have seen coming. Lucy and Daniel met 3 years earlier at a charity event. It was one of those connections that felt right from the start. Lucy, drawn to Daniel's warmth and easygoing nature. Daniel, captivated by Lucy's energy and ambition. Their love story unfolded like so many others, shared dreams, plans for the future, and a home they built together. To the outside world, they were the perfect pair. But relationships are never as simple as they appear, and theirs was no exception. Lucy's demanding job as a sales manager meant long hours and frequent travel. Daniel, a carpenter with a quieter life, supported her goals, even as the distance between them grew, first in time spent apart, then in something far less tangible. At first, Daniel told himself it was nothing, but little things started to stand out. Unexplained absences, hurried conversations, and moments that didn't quite make sense. The Lucy he thought he knew was slipping away, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. In July of that year, Daniel decided to stop wondering and start looking for answers. What he found would leave him reeling. It was a moment that would set off a chain of events neither he nor Lucy could have foreseen. On a warm summer evening, Daniel sat in his car, parked outside a hotel he had never visited before. He watched as Lucy's car pulled into the lot, watched as she stepped out, and waited as she disappeared inside. Minutes turned to hours, and every second felt like an eternity. When she finally emerged, she wasn't alone. The sight of her walking arm in arm with another man was a blow that Daniel wasn't prepared for. His world, his certainty, and his trust crumbled in an instant. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a tragedy that would leave an entire community grappling with questions that may never have answers. In the next hour, we'll piece together the events that led to one of the most shocking crimes Norwich had ever seen. This is the story of Lucy Carter and Daniel Ward, and how a love that seemed so certain unraveled in ways no one could have expected. Norwich, a town that feels like it belongs in a storybook. Nestled in the heart of England, it's a place where life moves at its own gentle pace. Families stroll along cobblestone streets, neighbours wave to one another, and the town's centrepiece, a centuries-old cathedral, stands tall, watching over its people. Violent crime, that's something that happens elsewhere, in big cities with unfamiliar faces, not here. The town's charm is matched only by its quiet predictability, but behind the manicured gardens and picturesque scenery, this peaceful community would soon be shaken to its core. Lucy Carter and Daniel Ward lived in one of the modest flats just outside the town centre. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a balcony overlooking a quiet street. But to them, it was home.
Lucy was ambitious, a career-driven sales manager with her sights set on climbing the corporate ladder. Her drive and confidence were magnetic, drawing people to her effortlessly.
Daniel, in contrast, was the steady rock in their relationship. A carpenter by trade, he found joy in creating things with his hands, building furniture, fixing broken pieces, and making their flat a reflection of their love. He adored Lucy, supporting her dreams without hesitation, always ready with a kind word or a warm meal when she returned home late from work. Together, they seemed like the perfect match, Lucy's energy balanced by Daniel's calm, her ambition fueled by his unwavering support. Friends described them as inseparable, the kind of couple who always seemed to have each other's backs. But even in the strongest relationships, cracks can form. Over time, Lucy's job began demanding more of her. Late nights, out-of-town meetings, and last-minute business trips became the norm. Daniel, ever patient, trusted her completely. He believed her when she said she was working hard for their future, that her absences were temporary, and that everything she was doing was for them. But sometimes, trust can be blinding. Daniel started to notice little things, subtle shifts that didn't sit right. A new perfume Lucy hadn't worn before, phone calls she would step out of the room to take, a text message that made her smile, followed by a hurried effort to lock her screen. None of it felt significant on its own, but together it painted a picture that Daniel couldn't ignore.
Still, he pushed his doubts aside. Lucy was his world, and he couldn't imagine a life without her. Confronting her would mean admitting that something was wrong, and he wasn't ready to face that.
They had met 3 years earlier at a charity event. Lucy had been volunteering as part of her company's community outreach program, and Daniel was there helping set up booths and stages. Their connection had been instant, one of those rare moments where two people seem to find each other at just the right time. Their first date was at a cozy cafe in town. They talked for hours, sharing dreams, fears, and everything in between. By the end of the night, they both knew this was something special. Over the years, their love had grown deeper. Birthdays, holidays, quiet nights watching movies. They built a life together, piece by piece. But as Lucy's career took off, the time they once shared became scarcer. Daniel tried to adapt, focusing on his woodworking projects and finding ways to fill the empty hours. But the distance between them wasn't just physical, it was emotional. And Daniel wasn't the only one who felt it. Lucy, too, was struggling. The long hours at work weren't just about her career. They were an escape. She had found something, or someone, outside their relationship that made her feel alive again. But secrets have a way of festering, and Lucy's would soon become impossible to hide. Friends and neighbors saw only the surface, a couple who had everything going for them. But behind closed doors, the cracks in their relationship were widening. Lucy's late nights became more frequent. Her explanations grew vaguer. And Daniel, though he tried to convince himself otherwise, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Norwich was still the same quiet town it had always been, but for Lucy and Daniel, their world was changing. They were standing on the edge of something neither of them could see yet, something that would leave their lives and the town itself forever changed. In the coming days, Daniel would make a choice that would set everything into motion, a choice born out of love, fear, and suspicion, a choice that would lead them both down a path from which there was no return. Daniel Ward was no stranger to hard work. His days as a carpenter were long, but his satisfaction came from knowing he was building a future for himself and Lucy. Yet, as the months passed, a gnawing feeling began to take root in his mind, an unease he couldn't shake. Lucy was changing.
At first it was subtle. She started coming home later than usual, her excuses vague. "Just work," she'd say with a tired smile, brushing past him and heading straight for the shower. Daniel.
She became distant, her laughter less frequent, her attention always somewhere else. Conversations turned into one-word answers, and her phone became an ever-present barrier between them. Daniel noticed how she'd angle it away from him or leave the room entirely to take calls.
It's just a stressful time at work, Lucy would insist, brushing off his concerns. But Daniel wasn't convinced. The woman he loved was slipping away, and he didn't know how to stop it.
Then came the inconsistencies, stories that didn't quite add up. Lucy would say she was in meetings all day, but her colleagues seemed unaware. She mentioned trips to clients' offices, yet there were no receipts, no photos, no signs that she'd been where she claimed. Daniel began to feel like a stranger in his own home. The woman he had trusted with his heart was keeping secrets, and those secrets were driving a wedge between them. Desperation began to creep in. Daniel needed answers, proof that his suspicions weren't just the product of his imagination. He installed a GPS device on Lucy's car, something he never thought he'd do, but felt he had no choice. It didn't take long for his worst fears to be confirmed. One evening, as Lucy claimed she was meeting a client in another part of town, Daniel sat in his car, tracking her movements on his phone. The small dot representing her car stopped at a hotel. Heart pounding, Daniel drove to the location, parking a safe distance away. He watched as Lucy emerged from her car, her face lit up in a way he hadn't seen in months. She wasn't alone. A man, tall and confident, greeted her. The two exchanged a brief glance before disappearing into the hotel together. Daniel sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was undeniable. The woman he loved, the one he had trusted implicitly, was leading a life he knew nothing about. He stayed there for hours, watching, waiting, unable to move. When Lucy finally emerged, the look on her face was carefree, almost happy. Daniel didn't confront her that night. Instead, he went home, the weight of what he'd seen crushing him. The confrontation came the next day. Daniel couldn't hold it in any longer. As Lucy walked through the door, he stood waiting, his arms crossed, his eyes filled with pain and anger. "Who is he?" Daniel's voice was trembling, barely above a whisper. Lucy froze, her smile fading instantly. "What are you talking about?" she replied, trying to maintain her composure. But Daniel pressed on, laying out everything he had seen. The GPS tracking, the hotel, the man. There was no denying it now. Lucy finally admitted to the affair, her voice wavering. She tried to downplay it, calling it a mistake, something that didn't mean anything. But to Daniel, it meant everything. The argument escalated, voices were raised, accusations thrown. Daniel's heartbreak turned into rage, his trust shattered beyond repair. He paced the room, his mind racing, as Lucy stood there, seemingly unaffected by the devastation she had caused. In that moment, their love story turned into something else entirely. The betrayal had cut too deep, leaving behind a wound that no apology could heal. And though neither of them realized it yet, this confrontation was only the beginning of a tragedy that would change their lives forever. After weeks of suspicion and sleepless nights, Daniel finally decided he couldn't ignore the tracker anymore. That fateful evening, he sat in his car outside their flat, staring at the blinking dot on his phone. Lucy's car had stopped at a familiar location, the hotel. This time, it wasn't just a suspicion. It was a truth he needed to confront head on. Grabbing his jacket and his toolbox, he drove in silence, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. Daniel parked just outside the hotel, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. He couldn't bring himself to get out of the car right away. Instead, he sat there, his heart racing, watching the entrance as his mind replayed every excuse Lucy had ever given him. When he finally stepped out, his feet felt like lead, carrying him toward the lobby. He moved cautiously, scanning the room numbers on the first floor before pausing outside one door, room 214. The GPS signal was steady. She was inside. His knuckles rapped softly against the door at first, then harder when no one answered. A murmur of voices came from inside. His breathing quickened. Without a second thought, Daniel twisted the knob. It was unlocked, and pushed the door open. Inside the dimly lit room, the scene before him shattered any remaining doubt. Lucy was there, lying on the bed, her hair disheveled, laughing softly with the man beside her. The sight felt like a knife twisting in his chest.
"Lucy!"
Daniel's voice cracked, startling them both. The laughter stopped abruptly as their eyes locked. Lucy shot up from the bed, her face pale.
"Daniel, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice a mix of shock and guilt.
The man stood, moving in front of Lucy protectively. "You need to leave," he said firmly. But Daniel wasn't listening. His mind was racing, consumed by the betrayal playing out in front of him.
"This is what you've been doing? Lying to me? Cheating on me?" Daniel shouted, his voice filled with anguish.
Lucy tried to speak, her words tumbling out in fragments. "It's not what it looks like. Please, just let me explain." But there was no explanation that could soothe the storm brewing inside Daniel. Words turned into shouting, the tension in the small room growing unbearable. Lucy reached for Daniel, trying to calm him, but he pulled away. His eyes darted to the man, who stood silently, refusing to back down. "I trusted you," Daniel yelled, his voice breaking as he stepped closer. In his rage, he grabbed a hammer from his toolbox, which he had brought in by reflex. Lucy screamed, her voice piercing the air. The man lunged toward Daniel, trying to intervene, but it was too late. In a blind fit of rage, Daniel swung the hammer, striking the man first. He collapsed to the floor, clutching his head. Lucy tried to run, but Daniel turned toward her, his anger now uncontrollable. She begged him to stop, tears streaming down her face, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Daniel's world had already shattered, and with it, his restraint. The commotion drew the attention of hotel staff, who called the police. When they arrived, they found Daniel sitting on the floor, his hands bloodied, the hammer lying next to him. He didn't resist as they arrested him, his expression vacant, the weight of his actions already settling in. The investigation into Lucy Carter's tragic death began immediately. Police arrived at the crime scene to find Daniel Ward sitting motionless on the floor of the hotel room. His hands were covered in blood, the hammer resting beside him, a chilling testament to the violence that had just occurred. Daniel didn't resist when officers handcuffed him. "I did it," he muttered repeatedly, his voice devoid of emotion. It was a confession, but for investigators, it was only the beginning of unraveling what had led to such a devastating act. Inside the hotel room, investigators meticulously documented every detail. Bloodstains spattered the walls and carpet. Lucy lay on the bed, motionless, her injuries horrifyingly clear. The other man, barely conscious, was rushed to the hospital, his survival uncertain. As they searched Daniel's belongings, officers found a journal tucked inside his toolbox, a journal that would later provide chilling insights into his unraveling mental state. Witnesses at the hotel described hearing a loud argument coming from room 214. Staff members recalled seeing Daniel enter earlier that evening, his face pale but determined. One guest reported hearing screams followed by loud thuds, which prompted them to call the police. Back at the station, Daniel's confession poured out in fragments, interwoven with sobs and moments of eerie calm. "I couldn't take it anymore," he said. "She was my everything, and she threw it away." As investigators pieced together the timeline, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. Lucy's increasing absences, Daniel's decision to install a GPS tracker on her car, and the final confrontation in the hotel room all pointed to a crime driven by betrayal and obsession. Months later, Daniel's trial began, drawing widespread attention from the quiet town of Norwich and beyond. The courtroom was packed. Family members of both Lucy and Daniel sat on opposite sides, their grief palpable. Daniel's defense team painted a picture of a man consumed by heartbreak, arguing that the crime was an impulsive act of passion. They pointed to his journal, which detailed his anguish and feelings of worthlessness after discovering Lucy's affair. "He was pushed to his breaking point," his attorney argued. The prosecution, however, had a different narrative. They claimed that Daniel's actions were premeditated, citing the GPS tracker as evidence. "This wasn't a man caught in the heat of the moment," the prosecutor declared. "This was a man who had been planning, who brought a weapon with him, and who chose violence over walking away.
Testimonies from Lucy's friends and co-workers painted a complex picture. While they spoke of her kindness and ambition, some admitted she had confided in them about her struggles with Daniel's controlling behavior. Daniel's own friends described a different man, loyal, loving, but increasingly paranoid as his relationship with Lucy began to crumble. The most powerful testimony came from the man Lucy had been seeing. Recovering from his injuries, he recounted the moment Daniel stormed into the room, his rage palpable. "I thought he was going to kill us both," he said.
After weeks of emotional testimony and deliberation, the jury reached their decision. Daniel Ward was found guilty of murder. The judge handed down the sentence, life imprisonment, with a minimum of 25 years before the possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Daniel sat motionless, his face etched with regret. Meanwhile, Lucy's family clung to one another, their tears a mix of sorrow and relief. Justice, they felt, had been served, but the loss of their daughter was a wound that would never heal. The case of Lucy Carter and Daniel Ward left an indelible mark on the town of Norwich. A once peaceful community was forced to confront the dark realities of trust, betrayal, and unchecked emotions. For Lucy's family, the pain of her loss would linger forever. For Daniel, a lifetime behind bars offered little solace for the choices he made that night. The murder of Lucy Carter sent shockwaves through the quiet town of Norwich, a place where violent crimes were almost unheard of. Residents who once felt secure in their serene, picturesque community now spoke in hushed tones, locking doors that once remained open. The tragedy was not just a headline, it became a wound etched into the town's collective memory. For Lucy's family, the loss was beyond comprehension. Her parents, Anne and Michael Carter, were left grappling with a void they could never fill. "She was our light," Anne said in a rare interview, her voice breaking. "And now it's gone forever." Daniel's family too was devastated. They struggled to reconcile the man they loved with the one who committed such an unspeakable act. His mother, visibly heartbroken, told reporters, "Daniel wasn't a monster. He was just broken." In the months that followed, the case became a painful topic of conversation in Norwich. At coffee shops, in local papers, and during town hall meetings, people questioned how a love story could unravel so tragically. The community wrestled with larger questions about trust and betrayal. How could two people who once seemed so perfect for each other end up at such a devastating crossroads? Was there a moment where things could have turned out differently, where tragedy could have been avoided? Lucy Carter and Daniel Ward were once the embodiment of love for those who knew them. Friends often remarked on their chemistry, their shared dreams of building a future together. But beneath the surface, fractures began to form, small, barely noticeable at first, until they became impossible to ignore. For Daniel, love had turned into obsession, a dangerous cocktail of emotions fueled by fear and betrayal. What began as devotion morphed into something darker, a fixation that left no room for reason. His inability to let go, coupled with Lucy's decisions, created a storm that neither could escape. Lucy Carter's story became a cautionary tale, reminding everyone of the fragile balance in relationships. Trust is the foundation upon which love is built, and without it, even the strongest bonds can crumble. As for Daniel Ward, he now spends his days behind bars, reflecting on the choices that led him there. In a letter to a friend, he wrote, "If I could take it all back, I would. But now, all I have is regret." The tragedy of Lucy and Daniel's story lies not just in the lives lost or shattered, but in the potential that was extinguished. Two families, forever marked by pain, and a community left to pick up the pieces. It's a reminder of how quickly love can turn into something unrecognizable when trust is broken and emotions are left unchecked. In the end, Lucy Carter and Daniel Ward's story isn't just about betrayal or violence. It's about the choices we make and the consequences we can't escape. A quiet town was forever changed, and the echoes of that fateful night still linger, a haunting reminder of what can happen when emotions overtake reason. In loving memory of Lucy Carter, whose life was cut tragically short, may her story serve as a reminder of the value of trust and the dangers of obsession. What are your thoughts on this heartbreaking case? Could Daniel's crime have been prevented? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more gripping true crime stories. This heartbreaking case shows how betrayal and unchecked emotions can lead to devastating consequences. Lucy Carter didn't deserve to die, her life stolen in an instant by the man who once promised to love her forever. Daniel Ward, once the person closest to her, now lives with the irreversible consequences of his actions, trapped in a reality where no amount of remorse can undo the damage. What began as love has become a lifetime of regret and a community that will never be the same. This is a story of lost trust, shattered dreams, and the chilling reality that sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who can hurt us the deepest. What are your thoughts on this case? Could Daniel's crime have been prevented? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Do you believe love, once broken, can be rebuilt? Or are the wounds too deep to heal? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more gripping true crime stories. Your support helps us bring you more cases, uncovering the truths behind the headlines.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the darkest secrets are hidden in plain sight.
Please remember to subscribe and stay tuned for more chilling true crime stories. The truth is out there.